The coupon is the color of old teeth. It smells of government ink and stale air. February 1942. In a room deep inside the White House, the blackout curtains are so thick that noon feels like midnight in a tomb. The only light comes from a single desk lamp, casting a jaundiced glow on a wall map where the pins are all wrong. Singapore has just fallen. The Indian Ocean, once an allied lake, is now a hunting ground. The air is tight, rationed. Every breath is shallow. President Franklin Roosevelt sits motionless, his face a mask of stone. Across from him, Donald M. Nelson, the chief of the War Production Board, nervously fingers the serrated edge of that single rubber ration coupon. He holds it like a talisman, or maybe a razor. A logistics colonel, his voice scraped dry, reads a single, brutal line from a memo that tastes like iron in the mouth. We have 18 months of rubber left. 18 months. After that, the entire United States Army, its tanks, its trucks, its jeeps, its planes, stops rolling. The clock isn't just ticking. It's screaming. On the table, a pile of documents whispers the history of how they got here. They are the paper witnesses to a century of greed and innovation. There's a ledger from the Congo, its columns scored with rubber quotas and faint, terrifying marks you can almost feel, like lashes. There's a seed label from Kew Gardens, dated 1876, its corners browned like a forged passport. And a Firestone contract from 1926, the corporate seal pressed so deep into the paper it looks like it bruised a nation. This is the story of how simple tree sap became sovereignty. How a sticky, useless gum was transformed into the muscle of empire. Because in the modern world, if the tire stops, the convoy halts. If the convoy halts, the front collapses. And if the front collapses, the entire republic becomes nothing but a rumor. This isn't just a materials crisis. This is an autopsy of power. Our story begins in 1839, with a man named Charles Goodyear. He wasn't a scientist, or a tycoon. He was an obsessed, destitute hardware merchant who was convinced that the sticky, unreliable sap of the hevea tree held a secret. For years, he'd been a joke. He mixed the stuff with anything he could find, salt, pepper, ink, soup, trying to stabilize it. His family starved. His children wore clothes made from rubber-coated fabric that melted in the summer sun. But one fateful day, he accidentally dropped a mixture of rubber and sulfur onto a hot stove. It didn't melt. It charred like leather, but the edge was firm, elastic. It remembered its shape. He called it vulcanization. In the patent drawings, the chemical bonds look so clean, so simple, little handshakes between molecules that refuse to let go. That handshake changed the world. Suddenly, waterproof boots stopped leaking in the winter slush. Steam engine gaskets held under immense pressure. Telegraph cables, insulated with this new wonder material, could finally whisper across the ocean floor. Then came the bicycle craze, swarming the streets of every major city. And finally, the automobile. The car turned a simple appetite for rubber into an insatiable, global destiny. The ads for pneumatic tires from companies like Michelin and Dunlop weren't just selling a product. They were selling a promise, speed without consequences, movement without limits. But that promise was a lie. And the invoice was written in blood. Deep in the heart of Africa, it was made payable in human flesh. In the 1890s, King Leopold II of Belgium carved out a personal colony 1 million square miles in size, bigger than Western Europe. He didn't call it a colony. He called it the Congo Free State, a humanitarian project to bring civilization and Christianity to the natives. But on the ground, his private army, the force public, had a different name for it, the rubber machine. The system was brutal in its simplicity. Villages were given impossible quotas for wild rubber collection. To ensure compliance, the soldiers would take the women and children hostage. If the men failed to bring back the required weight of sap, their families were starved, beaten, or murdered. Ammunition was expensive, and Leopold's accountants in Brussels demanded that every cartridge be accounted for. So soldiers were ordered to prove they hadn't wasted bullets on hunting, or worse, on rebels. The proof they brought back was a severed human hand. A bookkeeper in a starched collar thousands of miles away would turn a page in a leather-bound ledger. Next to rubber collected, a second column, cartridges expended. A third, hands received. This wasn't bookkeeping. It was the industrialization of terror. For years, the screams were muffled by the jungle. But then, a few brave souls started listening. An Irish diplomat named Roger Casement traveled the Congo River in 1904, documenting the horror in a report that dripped with names, dates, and distances. An English shipping clerk named E.D. Morrell noticed a strange imbalance in the manifests. Ships arrived in the Congo full of rifles and chains, and left laden with raw rubber. He knew a crime was being committed. Their work, along with the photographs taken by missionaries, images of mutilated children, of men staring into the camera with dead eyes, finally ignited an international scandal. Under immense pressure, Leopold was forced to hand his private hell over to the Belgian state in 1908. The worst of the spectacles were trimmed away. But the profits, and the rubber, kept flowing. While Leopold was building his empire of pain, another, quieter crime was unfolding. one that would change the map of rubber forever. The year is 1876. A dashing British adventurer named Henry Wickham stands on the docks of Para, Brazil. He watches as his cargo, dozens of large, wicker crates, is carefully loaded onto a steamship bound for Liverpool. The port authorities ask what's inside. Exotic botanical specimens for Her Majesty's Royal Gardens at Kew, he says with a charming smile. It was a lie. Inside those crates, carefully packed in dried banana leaves, were over 70,000 seeds from the Hevea brasiliensis tree. For centuries, Brazil had held a complete monopoly on the world's rubber. The seeds were illegal to export. But Wickham, the prince of rubber thieves, slipped past the guards and sailed into history. At Kew Gardens, the seeds were nurtured into seedlings. From there, they were shipped to the fertile soils of British colonies, Ceylon, and especially British Malaya. The Dutch quickly followed suit in their East Indies territories. On vast plantation hillsides, a new, industrial order was imposed on the jungle. Native forests were clear-cut and replaced with perfect, silent rows of rubber trees. Tappers, mostly imported laborers from India and China, worked to the rhythm of a planter's bell. Their movements were precise, disciplined, a herringbone cut into the bark, a small cup, a spout. The white latex bled slowly, methodically. The ledger smiled. Yield skyrocketed. By the 1910s, this new, plantation rubber from Southeast Asia was so cheap and plentiful it flooded the market. Brazil's wild-tapped latex couldn't compete. The boom went bust. In the city of Manaus, 1,000 miles up the Amazon, the magnificent opera house, where European divas once sang, dimmed its chandeliers, and then went cold. River towns that had briefly tasted Parisian luxury shriveled back into jungle outposts. A single, well-timed seed heist had accomplished what no army ever could. It had bankrupted a continent. With this new plantation order, the power over rubber consolidated. British and Dutch estates turned rubber production into a science of extraction, not just from trees, but from people. Low wages, overseers' notebooks, and company script trapped workers in a cycle of debt. In 1922, the British government launched the Stevenson Restriction Scheme, a cartel designed to artificially limit supply and drive up prices. American manufacturers, led by men like Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone, howled in protest across the Atlantic. They were tired of being held hostage. Firestone decided he would not wait to be choked. In 1926, he struck a deal with the small, desperate nation of Liberia. In exchange for a loan, Firestone received a 99-year lease on 1 million acres of land. He built a company town named Harble, for Harvey and his wife, Idabel, with clean, segregated rows of housing and one absolute master, the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. A sovereign nation had been cinched to a corporate assembly line. And the echoes of the Congo never truly faded. In the early 1900s, another scandal erupted, this time in the Putumayo region of the Amazon, on the border of Peru and Colombia. Here, the Peruvian Amazon Company, run by a brutal tycoon named Julio Cesar Arana, used the same methods as Leopold's forced public, whippings, debt peonage, and the outright extermination of indigenous communities, all to feed the world's hunger for rubber. Roger Casement, the same man who had exposed the Congo, walked that blood-soaked frontier in 1912. The testimonies he collected were the same. The horror was the same. The pattern was set. And then, the sea tilted. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. The world erupts in flame. The Japanese war machine sweeps through Southeast Asia with shocking speed. Malaya is overrun. On February 15, 1942, the fortress of Singapore, the jewel of the British Empire, capitulates. The Dutch East Indies fall soon after. In just over 3 months, the Allied powers lose control of 90% of their natural rubber supply. The artery is cut as cleanly as a tapper's knife. And that brings us back to that dark room in Washington. 18 months on the clock. The War Production Board and the newly formed Office of Rubber Reserve turn that grim memo into marching orders for an entire nation. The objective, invent a way out of the crisis, or lose the war. The country slows to a crawl. A national speed limit, the Victory 35, is imposed to save wear on tires. Gas and tire ration books appear on every kitchen table, the most important documents in the house. Scrap drives are launched in every town. Schoolchildren go door to door, collecting old rain boots, garden hoses, and hot water bottles. These mountains of discarded rubber become patriotic symbols, piled high in town squares. Meanwhile, a desperate gamble is made. Brazil, the ghost of the rubber boom, is asked to get back in the game. Tens of thousands of poor Brazilians are recruited as soldados de borracha, rubber soldiers, and sent deep into the Amazon to tap the wild trees once more. The promises of good pay and a hero's welcome were mostly lies. Thousands died from malaria, snake bites, and sheer isolation before a single drop of their latex ever reached a factory. At the darkest edge of this story, another factory rises. In Nazi-occupied Poland, the German chemical giant IG Farben builds a massive synthetic rubber plant next to its new concentration camp, Auschwitz. The project, using a formula called Buna, was meant to make the Third Reich immune to rubber blockades. The factory, known as Auschwitz, was built and run by tens of thousands of slave laborers from the camp. It was the industrialization of despair, a place where prisoners were literally ground into a project that ate lives and delivered almost no usable rubber. It was a monument to corporate evil, a moral black hole. But back in America, the scientists were gaining. In university labs and corporate research centers, a crash program of unprecedented scale was underway. They focused on a promising, if difficult, formula called GRS, government rubber styrene. They brewed it in massive pressure vessels and kettles, each batch a high-stakes bet that chemistry could outrun the collapse of empire. And it worked. By 1944, the sheer industrial might of the United States had achieved the impossible. American synthetic rubber production didn't just replace the lost imports, it eclipsed them. New tires rolled off the assembly lines and onto the trucks, tanks, and planes. The convoys rolled across North Africa. The landing craft hit the beaches of Normandy. The B-29s took off from island airfields in the Pacific. The war was won on many fronts, but it was kept moving on a foundation of chemistry, rationing, and sheer national will. The coupon on the memo had become the wheels of victory. When you peel back the noise of history, a blueprint emerges. A pattern. Critical choke point materials, things the world cannot live without, breed empires of compulsion. Control the source, the port, the patent, or the price, and the world will answer to you. Lose control, and you have two choices: invent your way out, or be buried. The story of rubber is a century-long tutorial in this brutal logic. Seed theft, price cartels, corporate quasi-colonies, ration books, and, when shame is cheap and profits are high, outright terror. 3 hinges turn this entire story. First, 1876, Wickham's seed heist proves that botany and technology can outflank borders, dooming Brazil's monopoly. Second, 1904, Casement and Morel prove that ledgers and witness oaths can be weaponized, making atrocity a diplomatic risk. And third, 1942, the rubber panic forces a nation to weaponize science itself, snapping a supply chain that once felt as fixed as gravity. The bill for this century of speed is itemized in forests shaved down to sterile monocultures. In indigenous lives extinguished from the Congo to the Putumayo. In sovereign nations mortgaged to corporate strategy. And in a home front that learned to measure its patriotism in coupons and miles per hour. You can still hear that ledger turning today. The nouns have changed, but the grammar of power is the same. We talk of cobalt from the Congo for our batteries, of rare earth metals for our electronics, of semiconductor fabs that are guarded like military bases. We see rainforests cleared for palm oil and, yes, still for rubber. The dust from our car tires sheds microplastics into our oceans and our lungs. The map hasn't changed. Whoever sits on the choke point writes the rules, until someone else finds a side door, and the whole empire falls through it. The tire under your car isn't just rubber. It is a quiet constitution of power, written in contracts, quotas, sap, and secrets. The verdict is clear: when a single input becomes the hinge of power, our thirst for momentum tempts us to spend people like fuel. We still do it. We bargain away our conscience for convenience, for the phone that glows, the car that hums, the delivery that arrives tomorrow, and we call it efficiency, because the paperwork balances and the screams are very far away. So we want you to join this investigation. Subscribe to Archives of Humanity for more daily deep dives into the secret histories that shape our world. But more than that, look at the objects around you. That phone. Those sneakers. That car. They all have a story, a supply chain that stretches across the globe and through time. And that brings us to our final question, the one they faced in that dark room in 1942. If you were at that table, with the clock screaming and 18 months of rubber left, which would you ration first, speed, profit, or innocence? Let us know your verdict in the comments below.